The year is 1892. In the heart of New York City's Gilded Age, where fortunes were forged in steel and secrets were traded like currency, the mansion of Miss Beatrice Carmichael stood on Fifth Avenue as a monument to both. It was a palace of marble and moonlight, and on this crisp autumn evening it was the setting for a sacrifice. Beatrice sat at her vanity, the gaslights hissing a soft serpentine song. Her reflection was a study in porcelain perfection, a serene mask framed by coils of dark hair. But her eyes, the color of a winter storm, held no serenity. They held a chilling, absolute stillness. On the polished rosewood beside her, nestled amongst pearl necklaces and diamond hairpins, was a small, ornate perfume atomizer. Its contents were not jasmine or rose. They were a carefully distilled tincture of nightshade, wolfsbane, and a secret she would carry to her grave. Tonight's offering was Mr. Alistair Finch, a railroad tycoon whose ambition was matched only by his arrogance. He was the third man this season to seek her hand, drawn by the irresistible trinity of her staggering inheritance, her impeccable social standing, and the intoxicating challenge of taming the city's most enigmatic heiress. He, like the others, saw her as a prize. He never once considered that she might be the hunter. Beatrice's reputation was a carefully constructed fortress, its walls built of rumor and its moat filled with innuendo. The society pages, in their gentle cruelty, called her the Ice Queen. But in the smoke-filled back rooms of gentlemen's clubs and the hushed parlors where true power was brokered, she had another name, the Black Widow of Fifth Avenue. 2 fiancés in 2 years, both powerful, both wealthy, both dead. The first, a shipping magnate named Arthur Croft, had collapsed at a gala, his heart having supposedly given out. The second, the banker Julian Thorne, had wasted away from a virulent summer fever just weeks before their wedding. In both cases, the attending physicians were baffled by the violent, untraceable speed of the decline. And in both cases, Beatrice, exquisitely tragic in her black mourning silks, had inherited a portion of their vast fortunes through clauses in their engagement contracts, her own immense wealth growing with each funeral. The city was addicted to the scandal. Will Alistair Finch be the one to finally thaw the Ice Queen's heart? One columnist mused. Or will he, too, fall victim to the Carmichael curse? The narrative was irresistible, a public spectacle of wealth, beauty, and death. Downstairs, the grand ballroom hummed with the energy of the city's elite. Alistair Finch stood at its center, his booming laugh a declaration of his own importance. He was a man who conquered territories, both on maps and in drawing rooms. Beatrice to him was the final, most beautiful frontier. Watching him from the periphery was Dr. Thomas Blackwood, the Carmichael family physician for 2 decades. Blackwood was a man of science in an age that still flirted with superstition. His face, etched with a quiet intelligence, was a mask of professional concern, but beneath it a seed of profound unease had taken root. He had attended both Croft and Thorne in their final agonizing hours. He had signed their death certificates, the diagnoses feeling like lies on his tongue. The symptoms had been a horrific clinical puzzle, violent stomach cramps, a raging thirst that no water could quench, and a chilling of the extremities that seemed to creep inward toward the heart. He had suspected poison. He was a fool not to, but his most sophisticated tests had revealed nothing. To accuse Beatrice Carmichael, the orphaned darling of New York, without proof was an act of professional and social suicide, yet his conscience was a heavy coat he could not shrug off. Tonight, he had promised himself, he would not be a passive observer. He would be a guardian. Beatrice made her entrance, and the ballroom held its breath. She was a vision in black silk that shimmered like a pool of oil, diamonds glittering at her throat like captured stars. Her smile was a dazzling, practiced thing, a weapon she wielded with expert precision. Her eyes scanned the crowd, dismissing dozens of admirers, until they landed on Finch. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr that made the hairs on his arm stand up. "I trust my humble home meets your approval." "It is a palace, my dear," he boomed, taking her hand and kissing it with a flourish of ownership. "A palace fit for a queen." "And her king?" Beatrice asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The challenge was subtle, a silken thread of steel in her voice, but Finch was too deafened by his own ego to hear it. Later, they found themselves in the glass-walled conservatory, a lush, humid jungle of exotic orchids and ferns under the watchful eye of a full moon. It was Beatrice's favorite room, a place where beautiful, dangerous things grew in carefully controlled conditions. A servant entered, silent as a shadow, and presented a silver tray. On it rested a single perfect mango, its skin a blushing sunset of red, orange, and gold. The mango was the latest obsession of New York's upper crust, a rare and expensive luxury imported from the tropics. It was a symbol of wealth and worldliness. For Beatrice, it was a canvas. Its strong, sweet, and slightly fibrous flesh was ideal for masking the subtle, bitter aftertaste of the compounds she had learned to master. She took a small silver-handled knife from the tray and began to slice the fruit, the sweet, fragrant aroma filling the air. Her movements were delicate, precise, almost surgical. "An unusual choice for a party," Finch commented, watching her hands. "I find the usual to be so dreadfully boring," Beatrice replied, her gaze fixed on her work. She offered him a slice on the tip of the knife. He took it, his fingers brushing against hers with a possessive confidence that made her smile tighten. He ate it with the relish of a man who believed the world existed to please his palate, proclaiming it the finest fruit he had ever tasted. He did not notice the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she sliced a second piece for herself, a piece from the opposite, untainted side of the fruit. From the doorway of the conservatory, hidden by a large palm, Dr. Blackwood watched the intimate ritual. The shared fruit, the feigned affection, a cold dread, chillingly familiar, coiled in his stomach. This was how it began. Beatrice felt Blackwood's gaze on her, a persistent, analytical pressure. She had always been aware of the doctor. He had been a fixture in her life since childhood, a friend of her father's. But he was the only man who had ever looked at her and not seen an heiress, a beauty, or a prize. He saw a problem to be solved, and that made him the most dangerous man she knew. An hour later, as the last of the guests were departing, the performance began. Finch, who had been loudly detailing his plans to build a new rail line through the Rockies, suddenly stopped. The blood drained from his face. He pressed a hand to his stomach, a look of confused betrayal in his eyes. "A momentary indigestion," he grunted, trying to force a smile. Beatrice was at his side instantly, her face a perfect mask of alarm and concern. "Oh, my dear Alistair, you look dreadfully unwell. Let me help you to the sitting room." But Dr. Blackwood was already moving, intercepting them with a quiet, firm authority. "Allow me, Miss Carmichael," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He took Finch's arm, his professional gaze already cataloguing the symptoms: the clammy skin, the shallow breathing, the faint purple tinge to the man's lips. It was happening again, exactly as before. He guided the groaning tycoon to a divan, the remaining guests murmuring in hushed, excited tones. Blackwood looked up and his eyes met Beatrice's across the room. Her expression was one of flawless angelic worry, but he saw through the performance. Deep in her stormy eyes, he saw a flicker of something else, a chilling, cold satisfaction, the triumphant gleam of a predator admiring her kill, and he knew, with a certainty that froze his blood, that he was not just a doctor treating a patient. He was a witness at the scene of a meticulously planned murder. "I shall fetch my medical bag," Blackwood announced to the room, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that silenced the whispers. He turned to Beatrice, his voice dropping so only she could hear the steel beneath it. "And I shall be taking a blood sample for a full analysis. We must be thorough, Miss Carmichael. We cannot risk a third tragedy." The unstated threat was as sharp as a scalpel. He was no longer playing by society's rules. He was declaring war. Beatrice did not flinch. She met his accusatory gaze with one of cool, unbothered innocence. "Of course, Doctor," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "Do whatever you must. I only want what's best for him." But as he turned and strode from the room, a single defiant thought echoed in her mind, a promise she had made to herself years ago, standing over her father's grave. "They will never own me." The game was afoot, and as Alistair Finch writhed on the divan, his life slipping away as surely as sand through an hourglass, Beatrice Carmichael and Dr. Thomas Blackwood stood on opposite sides of a new, far more dangerous battlefield, with a dead man's body as the prize. Alistair Finch was dead by 3:17 a.m. The official cause, scribbled on the death certificate by a hastily summoned and thoroughly intimidated junior physician, was a catastrophic gastric seizure of unknown origin. But Dr. Thomas Blackwood knew that unknown origin was merely a polite term for a perfectly executed murder. In the cold, sterile light of his private laboratory, a place of science and reason far removed from the perfumed lies of Fifth Avenue, Blackwood worked with a quiet, desperate fury. He had the vial of Alistair Finch's blood, procured with a subtle sleight of hand while pretending to administer a sedative. He subjected it to every test in his arsenal, his hands moving with the precision of a master watchmaker. He searched for the telltale signatures of arsenic, strychnine, belladonna, the common calling cards of the Victorian poisoner. He found nothing. The blood was maddeningly, impossibly clean. It was as if Alistair Finch's own body had simply, and with extraordinary violence, decided to stop living. Beatrice's unspoken challenge from the night before echoed in his mind, a ghostly taunt. "Do whatever you must." She had known he would find nothing. She had been daring him to try. Blackwood leaned back from his microscope, the acrid stench of chemicals and failure filling the small room. He felt a chilling mix of horror and a strange, unwelcome admiration. This was not the work of a common criminal. This was the work of an artist, a ghost who could kill without leaving a footprint. The official investigation was a farce from the start, led by a man named Detective Harding. Harding was a bulldog from the city's detective bureau, a man who navigated the world with a bludgeon, not a scalpel. He believed in facts, evidence, and the power of intimidation, tools that were utterly useless in the world of Beatrice Carmichael. He interviewed her in her morning parlor 2 days later. She was a masterpiece of tragic grief. Dressed in exquisite black lace, a single tear tracing a perfect, shimmering path down her porcelain cheek, she recounted the evening with a heartbreaking fragility that made Harding's gruff, methodical questions feel like an act of barbarism. "She's a delicate creature, Doc," Harding told Blackwood later that week, his tone one of gruff sympathy. "Caught in a terrible string of bad luck, to lose 3 fiancés. It's a damned shame." "It is not a shame, Detective," Blackwood replied, his voice tight with an impatience he could barely contain. "It is a statistical impossibility. It is a pattern. It is murder." "And where's your proof?" Harding countered, gesturing around his own cluttered office. "No weapon. No witnesses willing to say they saw a thing. Just your feelings. In my world, Doctor, feelings don't put a noose around a rich woman's neck." Blackwood knew he was utterly alone in this. The system was built to protect women like Beatrice, to cocoon them in a layer of wealth and social standing that made them untouchable. He had to find a different path to the truth. He began to dig not into toxicology reports, but into history, Beatrice's history. He had known her since she was a girl, the only child of the formidable Alistair Carmichael. Elias was a man who had built a financial empire with the ruthless ferocity of a wolf, a man whose love for his daughter was a possessive, suffocating thing. He hadn't raised a child, he had forged an heir. He had taught her strategy at the chess table, economics in the boardroom, and a cold, brutal pragmatism in all things. A memory, long dormant, surfaced in Blackwood's mind. The day Alistair Carmichael had died, 5 years ago, a sudden violent stomach ailment during a trip to the country. At the time, Blackwood had accepted the rural doctor's diagnosis. Now, the memory was a flashing red warning light. He spent 2 days tracking down the old doctor's records. The symptoms, they were identical to Finch's. The first victim, he realized with a jolt of ice in his veins, had not been Arthur Croft. It had been her own father. This new, terrible knowledge became the lens through which he examined the other men. He discovered that their defining trait was not just their wealth, but their ambition to control. Arthur Croft's engagement announcement had coincided with a hostile takeover bid for a smaller, rival shipping line, a company in which the Carmichael estate had a controlling interest. Julian Thorne, the banker, had been caught secretly trying to leverage Beatrice's assets to fund his own speculative ventures in South America. And Alistair Finch, as Blackwood discovered from a trusted legal source, had drawn up a prenuptial agreement that would have given him total control of her entire fortune and voting power in her company.